Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Casual Audio Papers. I double-checked the name this time. And we are continuing in the article, Implications for Educational Practice of the Science of Learning and Development. So, let's get right into it. Motivation and learning. Closely related to the developmental and cognitive processes we have previously reviewed is the issue of motivation for learning. Students will work harder to achieve understanding and will make greater progress when they are motivated to learn something. However, motivation is not just inherent in the individual. It can be developed by skillful teaching. Motivating tasks. Researchers have found that student motivation in the classroom is fostered by three major considerations about the tasks and conditions students confront. 1. The nature of the task and its value to the student. 2. The nature of the learner and his or her expectations of success. And 3. The nature of the learning environment and the extent to which it emphasizes learning goals and provides support. So the task, the learner, and the learning environment are the three considerations for attempting to get students to be motivated. And I suppose my guess would be that they have to have some sort of, what's the word? I suppose they just have to be synchronized with each other in some way. First and foremost, motivation is about the learner's perceptions of the task. As Lee notes, the learner implicitly asks, "What am I being asked to do? Am I capable of tackling these tasks? Is this task meaningful to me? What supports are available to me to wrestle with this task? Do I feel safe in attempting to wrestle with this task? And how do I weigh any risks or competing goals?" A learning task will have more value to students if they believe it is important, if it is relevant to their lives, can be connected to events they have experienced or care about, or focuses on problems that are interesting and realistic. It is helpful if the task offers choices of topics, research strategies, or modes of presentation that allow students to make a connection to their interests. A motivating task is also approachable, meaning within the zone of proximal development, and structured to provide evidence of progress along the way, so that it offers ongoing incentives to continue. Students are more likely to value learning when intrinsic reasons for learning are emphasized, as when the task potentially benefits others and/or results in products or performances that have an audience beyond the teacher. Students need to believe they can be successful if they are going to try. Their expectations for success influence their willingness to apply effort toward learning. These expectations depend on students' perceptions of the task and their likelihood of success, as well as on their inclinations to undertake new learning, tackle difficult tasks, and to take risks. These inclinations, in turn, are related to self-perceptions of ability and mindsets. Students with confidence in their abilities to succeed at a task work harder and persist longer, which leads to better performance. Among the factors shaping this sense of efficacy are students' beliefs about intelligence and their capacity to improve their intellectual abilities. If students believe that intelligence is a fixed trait and that there is nothing they can do to expand their capacity to learn, tend to think that no amount of effort will be worthwhile when they encounter a difficult task. Those who believe that intelligence is incremental and can be cultivated tend to be willing to try new things and work harder when they encounter an obstacle rather than giving up. That's actually really interesting. It makes sense on a motivational level. And I think one of the big misunderstandings about intelligence is people with average intelligence are dumb, which is not true. I think the biggest thing with intelligence, at least as we describe it as IQ, it has more to do with how well you can produce creative solutions to a particular problem, or how easily it comes to you to attempt to do or perform a particular task. But most people with average intelligence would be able to solve most problems, and so it might just depend on the amount of difficulty somebody has to sort of utilize in order to solve the particular problem that they're attempting to solve. But of course, there are people who are unfortunately a little, I don't want to say hopeless, but their inability is palpable. But that's a very small amount of the population. So just statistically speaking, most kids who put their mind to a particular task will be able to solve most problems. And so at this point, I wonder if it's just a useful lie, sort of like I know recently people have been using the chemical imbalance hypothesis for depression, and how a lot of times psychiatrists will just tell their patients that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance, and so therefore if they take this drug, then it'll give them a healthy balance of serotonin or whatever. Well, that's a useful lie, because it gives him the ability, or gives him the illusion that something is being done to help them. And so if kids think that intelligence is not fixed, then it gives them the ability or the illusion that they can pretty much do whatever they want based on intellect. But I don't know. The intelligence literature is a little nuanced, so let's continue. Students' sense of academic identity also matters. If a student feels he is not good at math or a bad reader, it will negatively affect his attention, motivation, and learning. Conversely, if a student sees herself as a mathematician, a reader, a scientist, or a writer, she will be more likely to engage and adopt a growth mindset in that domain. In addition, students who have received societal or school-delivered messages that they are less capable as a function of their race, ethnicity, gender, income, or other status will often translate those views into self-perceptions of ability affecting their performance on school tasks or tests. Now that one's an interesting one because, again, you have human free will that often plays a role in those sorts of things. Now it is true that statistically you will hamper people's abilities if you tell them that, if they translate the societal perception into the self-perception, like this paragraph is saying. But at the same time, you'll get people who are told that they can't do anything and they'll say, screw you, I'm going to do it anyway. And it's one of those things where you can study the issue in a post hoc manner, but you can't really take somebody in a particular position and predict with a high degree of certainty what they're going to do with their situation, at least in most circumstances, because individuals are much more self-actualizing than that. Schools foster these beliefs to the extent that they grow that they group or track students in ways that convey messages about perceived ability, deliver stereotypic messages associated with group status, or emphasize ability rather than effort, for instance, smartness versus work hard, in their judgments about students and attributions of causes of success. In the classroom, teachers should avoid labeling students and instead provide positive affirmations about individual and group competence, emphasize the importance of effort, and encourage students to understand that through effort they will indeed improve. Teachers can also acknowledge improvements through their feedback and ways their assessment and grading systems credit growth. Now, this is one of the evidences against the idea of multiculturalism. I mentioned, I think, in the first reading on this article, the difficulty between the multiculturalist sort of hypothesis about equality and the colorblind hypothesis of equality. And the issue with the multicultural hypothesis of equality is that you will sort of give people an identity that is separate from other people. And if the identity is, let's just say, a skin color, then they will sort of suppose that other things that have to do with the skin color will be part of their own identity. And so if the sort of cultural milieu around being black versus being white is up in the air, or if they receive anything along these lines regarding black versus white from their parents or from society or from other kids, and then their teachers say it's really important that we learn about blackness or we learn about whiteness, and it's very important that you understand that you are black versus or white or whatever, then kids will oftentimes, and of course going back to the statistical level of things, less the individual level of things, but kids will oftentimes take those identities and apply them to themselves. And so in our world, especially in school, where you're talking about the critical race theory side of these identities, I apologize, people are working, but the assumption is that to be a person of color is to be of nobler birth than it is to be a white person, because there's some sort of moral failing within whiteness. And even if, that's not really the intent, it does portray white people as oppressors and people of color as oppressed. And so under that assumption and under that sort of implication, white students versus black students will begin seeing themselves as either oppressors by nature or oppressed by nature. And that's what this is talking about here. In the classrooms, teachers should avoid labeling students and instead provide positive affirmations about individual and group competence, emphasizing the importance of effort. Now, if you say that, but then also turn around and say, historically, white people have been the oppressors and they have all the power in all of the systems, and black people have been put upon by this sort of society of whiteness that seeks to keep people of color down and all that sort of stuff. Then on the one hand, you are telling white students and black students that their individual competences and their group competences, because of their effort, are really good, but then on the other hand, that they're part of this this group that they cannot escape from because it's a racial thing, and you can't really not be part of your race. And the issue with that is critical race theory is not, like, it is an ethical theory, it's a moral theory, but it is kind of tricky in the way that it deals with it, because the ethical theory, it doesn't actually give you a normative It doesn't say this is how it ought to be. It just says this is how it is. The implication is that it ought to change, but people can do with it what they want. And so this is actually one of the earliest forms of critical theory is mercantilism, which is the idea that there are them versus us, and whoever them is and whoever the us is, and there are limited resources, so whoever gets the resources wins. And the basis for mercantilism was the desire to raise oneself up and one's own group up. And I just use that as an example because that sort of thinking does not mean that it'll become a more equitable society. In fact, the higher likelihood is if two groups are told that they are enemies of each other, there will be more people who have enough self-interest to say that my group is the better group and I will dominate the other group. And if you tell, let's say, white people that they are the dominant group and they need to step aside in order to let other people in, sentiment only goes so far. And so people will most likely just say, well, if I'm the dominant group, why should I step aside? There's no real reason. And I think that's one of the real dangers of this sort of rhetoric and this sort of theory, which is why the colorblind approach I prefer, even though it has its own issues. But what this paragraph essentially affirms is the colorblind approach. In the classrooms, teachers should avoid labeling students and instead provide positive affirmations about individual and group competence, emphasize the importance of effort, and encourage students to understand that through effort they will indeed improve. That is, whether you're black or white, doesn't matter. Although, you have the group that you're a part of, and that's important to you, and we should speak to that. But ultimately, you work hard enough and you can get ahead. That's essentially what this paragraph says. Which is funny because it goes against what previous paragraphs said, which is one of those things that you get in scholarship, a lot of self-contradiction. But it, explains why scholars can be on literally both sides of an issue and have the cognitive dissonance to say one thing and the other thing in almost the same breath without realizing it. Anyway, I digress. To make challenging tasks motivating and enhance expectancies of success, teachers can organize their lessons to connect them to issues relevant to students' lives, scaffold the learning process, and ensure that there are many ways for students to learn and represent their understanding. The learning environment supports motivation when learning and mastery goals are emphasized, rather than grades or performance goals. Learning goals are encouraged when scaffolding and support are provided. Effort and improvement are recognized. Mistakes are treated as learning opportunities. Students have the opportunity to revise their work. Evaluation emphasizes learning. Individual competition and comparison are minimized, and students are grouped by topic, interest, or choice rather than by their performance. These classroom features enhance intrinsic motivation, which more often results in high-quality learning and creativity. In contrast, extrinsic motivation based on external rewards that are used to control students' behavior can reduce students' intrinsic motivation for the task, as well as the quality of performance on the task. Although extrinsic rewards are sometimes useful to create incentives for a new behavior or practice, Their use should be minimal and reduced over time as the desired behavior become commonplace. Interest-driven learning. As we have noted, one driver of intrinsic motivation is interest in a topic, object, or activity. Ecological views of learning and development have focused attention on interest-driven learning, which is particularly important for development because it requires self-regulation, defining and pursuing goals, and reflection on how well one is doing. Neurological data, longitudinal ethnographic studies, naturalistic observational research, and experiments converge to provide evidence of the short and long-term benefits of interest for learning. In the short term, interest is cognitively energizing and it increases attention, leads the learner to generate questions, and sustains engagement in learning activities. In the longer term, interest can catalyze a consequential series of choices that over time accumulate and help launch pathways to future jobs, educational opportunities, and careers. Interests can also support academic resiliency, for example, in overcoming challenges in processing text or persevering in difficult tasks. In the four-phase model of interest development, earlier phases of interest are dependent on the social environment, as interests become more deeply connected to values, purpose, meaning, and identity. They become increasingly self-sustaining. Choices to learn might include initiating a new project activity, pursuing opportunities for mentoring, deciding to enroll in a formal class, or using technology to engage in personal learning excursions. At the same time, consistent with a contemporary understanding of the science of learning and development, interest in any domain is dynamic and can exhibit continuities and discontinuities depending on access to resources, such as welcoming affinity groups, relevant technologies and tools, role models, learning opportunities, and time. In this ecological view, the origins and evolution of interests are connected to both contextual and individual variables. They are simultaneously socially grounded and influenced by personal relevance based on unique experience, sense of purpose, and goals for the future. Teachers have a significant role to play in developing interests by customizing assignments and offering choices, providing material that sparks curiosity, expressing their own enthusiasm for a topic, designing activities that support exploration and are relevant to student identities, and connecting students with peers and mentors that share interests. I'm reading it again because I spaced out for a second. I'll just reread it. Teachers have a significant role to play in developing interests by customizing assignments and offering choices, providing material that sparks curiosity, expressing their own enthusiasm for a topic, designing activities that support exploration and are relevant to student identities, and connecting students with peers and mentors that share interests. One thing I really don't like about just like lists is you pay attention to the first few, and then by the end you're like, okay, and you pay attention to the last one. There's actually science behind that. It's the people can typically hold 4 to 7 bits of information, or 4 to 9 bits of information in their brain at any given time, and then only a little bit of that will actually make it to long-term memory. And these lists often don't have 4 to 9 bits of information. Okay, when teachers consider the longer-term trajectories of learning and development, they are better positioned to help broker future learning opportunities in addition to directly influencing learning through guiding, modeling, and explaining. In this view, interest is both a cause and a consequence of learning. Interests can develop over long periods of time, linked to activities that take place both in and outside of school. Homes, libraries, museums, camps, and a range of digital environments provide social and material resources for interest-driven learning. Teachers can help parents support interests by sharing ideas about ways to collaborate, learn from, or broker opportunities for their children. Meanwhile, parents can share with teachers what they have observed when their children are at home and have free time to explore activities on their own. They are uniquely suited to notice and support a child's nascent interests. Digital technologies provide an important catalyst for interest-driven learning, as they can be leveraged for learning across time and settings, with interests launched at school leading to informal learning at home, in summer camps, or in community-based contexts. The self-sustaining nature of interest-driven learning with technologies represents an important dimension of personalized learning. For example, technology is expanding opportunities for young people to gain experience with design-oriented activities like movie making, programming, and fabrication. In addition, as the NRC noted in How People Learn, interactive computer technologies can help people visualize difficult-to-understand concepts, give users feedback while they are learning, and learn about students' approaches to learning so as to personalize opportunities to learn. While many uses of technology have been found ineffective, uses that support student interests have been found to support achievement. A recent review of 70 studies ranging from large-scale experimental and quasi-experimental designs to smaller case studies noted that most studies found no effect on learning. Ineffective uses of technology featured individualized progression through workbook-type activities, phonics, grammar and punctuation exercises, drill on math items, and practice with multiple-choice test questions. Effective uses, on the other hand, featured simulations, games, data analysis, and writing that was part of interactive learning, where the technology was used to engage with data, explore and create, express ideas, and develop presentations of learning, and where peer discussions and teacher-led activities were also part of instruction. So the more fun activities had, the better effect on learning, essentially, is what I got from that paragraph. An example highlighted in the review illustrates the importance of combining interest-driven learning with the use of technology. Educators in Talladega County, Alabama, introduced one-to-one computing through a project-based learning program in which students conducted in-depth research projects, recorded podcasts, developed multimedia presentations, and designed and produced publications about their work. The initiative dramatically improved high school graduation and college-going rates. That's also really interesting because it basically made high school a lot more like college. Deep engagement in interest-driven experiences is associated with psychological assets, like a sense of confidence in creating novel ideas, confidence in learning about computing, a projected future of continued learning, or feelings of expertise with professional tools, social dispositions marked by an increased likelihood of teaching others what one knows, and choices to learn more as reflected in efforts to sustain learning, including starting new projects in school or at home, choosing to take elective classes to advance one's skills, finding mentors or peer-based learning partners, and locating informational resources in books or online. These types of choices, creating generative learning can help students learn to learn independently and set the stage for lifelong learning. Summary. The research we have reviewed suggests that to support student learning, Curriculum and instruction should be designed so that it helps build mental schema or models that connect ideas central to the discipline or domain. These goals should be pursued in a thoughtful sequence through authentic tasks and understandable representations that build on students' prior knowledge and capture the key aspects of the content to be learned. To facilitate deep understanding and transfer, teachers should combine explicit instruction with guided inquiry that allows students to engage in problem solving in real-world contexts, and should promote agency by asking students to evaluate, analyze, and create ideas, products, or solutions. Finally, to enable increasingly effective learning and the development of productive habits and mindsets, curriculum and assessment should support the acquisition of metacognitive skills, offer feedback through the learning process, encouraging students to revise their work so that they can internalize standards and perceive evidence of their growing competence that supports a growth mindset, providing opportunities for revision along with timely, constructive feedback on a regular basis, encourages a mastery-oriented approach to learning. Combined with a learning environment that supports individual needs, helping students develop the capacity to monitor their own learning promotes a sense of agency and ownership over their work, which in turn fosters motivation. All of these strategies are designed to help students become more self-sufficient and capable learners. I forgot that there's this thing on the side. Support for the development of social, emotional, and cognitive skills, habits, and mindsets. As we have noted, academic learning is tightly intertwined with social and emotional skills, mindsets, and decisions. Some of these are reinforced by instructional approaches that reduce anxiety and support a growth mindset, for example. Yet, more is needed to ensure that students fully develop these abilities to manage their emotions and mental focus, to work well with others, to persevere in the face of obstacles, and to make productive and socially responsible decisions. In this section, we treat the intentional development of the social, emotional, and cognitive skills, beliefs, and mindsets that support academic and life success. What the science of learning and development tells us. The SOLD synthesis builds on rich developments over the past 2 decades in social and emotional learning, or SEL. Cognitive skills such as problem solving, responsible decision making, and perspective taking interact with emotional skills such as emotion recognition, empathy, and emotion regulation, and with social skills including cooperation, helping, and communication. Attitudes, beliefs, and mindsets also matter for school and life success. Holding a growth mindset and connecting academic endeavors to personal values support learning. These capacities are influenced by input from teachers and other adults, and in turn, they inform higher order skills across cognitive, emotional, and social domains. Social, emotional, and other conditions of cognitive engagement influence the affective salience of instruction, how safe students feel, and how they focus their attention and make decisions. Principles of practice. Acknowledging the importance and the interaction of these capacities, the science of learning and development suggests the following principles for educational practice. 1. Schools and classrooms should explicitly teach and provide regular opportunities to integrate social, emotional, and cognitive skills into academic curricula and throughout the school day. 2. Students should receive guidance and support to develop habits and mindsets that promote perseverance, resilience, agency, and self-direction. For instance, executive function, self-regulatory routines, stress management, and growth mindset. 3. Schools should offer educative, and restorative behavior supports that teach students skills which enable positive behaviors, encourage them to take responsibility, and, as needed, make amends to restore relationships and community health. All of these practices support and derive from a school culture that aims to develop strong relationships, trust, positive interactions, and thoughtful development of student agency. Promoting social-emotional learning with students. Developing social-emotional skills. The Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, identifies 5 main areas of social-emotional competence. Self-awareness involves identifying emotions and accurate self-perceptions. Self-management includes managing stress and controlling impulses, which includes aspects of executive function. Social awareness entails perspective-taking, empathy, and appreciation for diversity. Relationship skills involving communication and cooperation are about establishing and maintaining healthy relationships. And responsible decision-making focuses on skills like identifying problems, evaluating, reflecting, and acting with consideration for the well-being of oneself and others. Some approaches to fostering students' academic, social, and emotional learning are delivered through standalone instruction, while others focus on integration of skills within the core academic curriculum. Formal programs teaching CEL have shown considerable success. A meta-analysis of 213 controlled studies of CEL programs representing more than 270,000 students from urban, suburban, and rural schools found participating students showed greater improvements than comparison students in their social and emotional skills, attitudes about themselves, others, and school, social and classroom behavior, test scores and school grades, including an average 11 percentile point gain in achievement, with an overall mean effect size of 0.27 for academic performance and 0.57 for CEL skills. Students also experienced reductions in misbehavior, aggression, stress, and depression. Benefits of CEL interventions on skills, attitudes, behavior, and academic performance have been found to endure and serve as a protective factor, preventing conduct problems and drug use on follow-up measures collected 6 months to 18 years later. Okay. Effective social and emotional learning programs provide instruction that is sequential, active, focused, and explicit. Social and emotional learning programming is more effective when conducted by school personnel who themselves have opportunities to support and deepen their own skills. This highlights the critical need for ongoing professional development around educators' social-emotional skills as a vital element for promoting these capacities in students. Outcomes can also be enhanced when social-emotional learning is embedded throughout the school day and integrated into other subject matter rather than introduced as standalone curriculum. More integration allows for strengthening of skills and transfer of learning by capitalizing on teachable moments and opportunities to reinforce and practice skills throughout the school day. Mindfulness practice, which cultivates greater awareness of one's experience infused with kindness, and related contemplative practices have also been linked to more pro-social behavior and reductions in implicit bias. Implementing social-emotional learning practices in schools. agenda to develop these critically important skills may begin by implementing efficacious social-emotional learning programs and other specific interventions, such as those included in guides provided by Center for Academic Social-Emotional Learning, or CASEL, and the U.S. Department of Education. Identifying common ingredients that are shared across effective programs and integrated into schools' normal routines, for instance, class meetings, and daily pedagogical practice can support a more integrated approach. For example, the American Institute for Research identified 10 instructional strategies that teachers use throughout the school day that can affect students' social and emotional skills. Examples include the kind of language teachers use, cooperative learning, and student-centered discipline, all practices we treat elsewhere in this article. In studies of high schools organized to develop socially and emotionally competent students, researchers found that student engagement, achievement, and positive behavior, being collaborative and supportive of their peers, resilient, employing a growth mindset, valuing opportunities to help others, were associated with infusion of social and emotional learning opportunities in every aspect of the school. This ranged from curriculum focused on perspective-taking and empathy in history and English language arts to community and social problem-solving in social studies, math, and science, community service projects, and the teaching of specific conflict resolution strategies, and the use of restorative practices. A whole school approach imbued with a social justice orientation, underscoring themes of interdependence and social engagement in daily activities, enabled students to act as agents of change, which enhanced their motivation and sense of agency, increases achievement and attainment, and reduces educational inequality. Developing habits, beliefs, and mindsets. A wide range of habits, beliefs, and mindsets influence emotions and learning, shaping how children approach and engage with the world, how they interpret the messages they receive, and how they respond to opportunities and challenges. Here we discuss those related to cultivating executive functions, developing productive mindsets, and reducing stress and trauma. Cultivating executive functions. Among the habits important for school success are those associated with the executive functions, which operate in 4 interrelated executive domains: attentional control, cognitive flexibility, goal setting, and information processing, which operate in an integrative manner to enable executive control. Children are engaged in exercising executive function throughout the school day to focus on their assignment and not get sidetracked by distracting thoughts, to follow multi-step instructions and make adjustments as necessary, and to take turns during play, to name a few examples. Although explicit development of executive functions has often been restricted to special education settings, most children need support to develop these skills optimally. Teachers can offer explicit opportunities to learn executive functions by providing tools and modeling to help students learn to organize themselves, think ahead, plan their actions, and decide on what behaviors they will pursue, rather than reacting impulsively. As we discussed earlier, these are skills and habits that are reinforced by the development of metacognitive skills, which allow children to reflect on and evaluate their plans and decisions. As teachers assign and scaffold complex work, they are building executive functioning and metacognitive skills. A well-scaffolded environment with strong organizational routines can help promote executive function as students learn to model approaches to tasks that can become part of their own organizational structures and self-management later. These reliable approaches to tasks, ranging from organizing one's notebook to engaging in instructional conversations or collaborative tasks can reduce cognitive load and promote learning as executive functions develop. While modeling strategies that can become part of the executive function repertoire if teachers are explicit about their reasons for different structures and if they gradually reduce scaffolding over time. Executive functions have been shown to improve through repeated practice coupled with increased challenge via games, aerobics, martial arts, yoga, mindfulness, and school curricula. So a lot of these are self-discipline sort of activities. So of course, executive function being primarily an object of self-discipline would be increased the more it is practiced. Executive functions training can also be a part of broader social-emotional learning programs and has been found to be beneficial to young children from the preschool years to pre-adolescence. Although explicit executive function training is often targeted toward younger students, brain development spurts in adolescence enable young people to think abstractly and become more deeply reflective. Explicitly fostering higher-order executive skills at this age can lead to greater levels of self-direction needed as students enter secondary school and later college and careers. It's talking mainly about neurological development, which sort of has particular eras in the child's development where it is most actively sort of developing. But that is sort of contested in that we don't really know precisely at what point the neurology is developing and to what degree, and whether or not these things can be studied on a broad level as opposed to on an individual level. But it is true, I believe, that these development eras they exist. We just don't know enough about them to really use them to the best of our knowledge, or use them optimally, I should say. Developing productive mindsets. Students' beliefs and attitudes have a powerful effect on their learning and achievement, as we were talking about before. 4 key mindsets have been identified as conducive to perseverance and academic success for students. 1. A belief that one belongs at school. 2. Belief in the value of the work. 3. Belief that effort will lead to increased competence. And 4. Sense of self-efficacy and the ability to succeed. The types of messages conveyed by teachers in schools and corresponding attitudes may be especially relevant with adolescents for whom the explicit skills training approaches that work for younger children tend to be less beneficial. Wait, I'm going to reread that. The types of messages conveyed by teachers in schools and corresponding attitudes may be especially relevant with adolescents for whom the explicit skills training approaches that work for younger children tend to be less beneficial. So they said that really weird, but basically there are the skills training that works for younger people, like children, probably are not as effective for adolescents. Effective programs that promote stronger learning for adolescents involve creating climates in which adolescents feel respected and affirmed, and giving them challenging work on which they are enabled to improve. The belief that effort will lead to increased competence constitutes a growth mindset, which has been found to foster greater achievement and well-being across academic, emotional, and social domains. The core principle that skills can always be developed is consistent with the science of neuroplasticity, that the brain is constantly growing and changing in response to experience. Learning this fact alone has been found to help change students' perspectives on their learning. Providing feedback focused on effort and process encourages students to adopt a growth mindset, whereas feedback that focuses on traits, for instance, smarts, depresses student motivation and achievement. Providing students with meaningful learning challenges, supports, and a clear sense of progress leading to mastery helps students develop a growth mindset. Students from groups that experience discrimination face particular challenges in feeling confident that their efforts will produce positive outcomes. Teachers can reduce student self-doubt and bolster confidence by showing that they value students. For example, affirmation interventions that guided students to share their personal goals for learning with their teachers in notes to which teachers responded were found to reduce the effect of stereotype threat among middle school students, resulting in higher academic performance for Black students with gains in grades sustained as long as 2 years later. I'm going to read that again for myself. That makes sense. Shaping productive mindsets can set into motion a cascade of effects that accumulate over time to result in more positive school outcomes. For example, increasing school affiliation and self-concept, resulting in higher levels of academic engagement that becomes self-reinforcing. Positive racial identity can also buffer societal negative stereotypes. Reducing the effects of stress and trauma. When children or adults are distracted by concerns that flow from their lives outside the classroom or social dynamics within the classroom, their capacity to focus on learning can suffer. Traumatic or strongly emotional events can simultaneously influence the regulation of affect, for example, feelings of depression or anxiety, physical phenomena such as heart rate or adrenaline production, and cognition, for example, executive functioning and working memory. Chronic stress due to trauma affects cognition and working memory. Cognitive load in the classroom is exacerbated by a lack of safety and belonging. Teachers' abilities to maintain a supportive, culturally responsive environment with consistent routines support student learning by reducing hypervigilance, anxiety, and extraneous cognitive load. Student support systems that offer counseling and social supports when children experience adversity, described in the educative and restorative approaches to behavior section, are also important to enable children to manage their emotions and improve their circumstances so that they are able to learn. Researchers have also investigated mindfulness as a tool to reduce stress and cultivate calmness and attention. Mindfulness practice strengthens internal and external awareness by bringing deliberate attention to all of one's experience, including breath, body, thought, feelings, and the surrounding environment. The practice of mindfulness promotes neural integration and may be particularly helpful during the period of adolescent brain remodeling, contributing to higher capacities for regulation. The use of mindfulness strategies for monitoring and redirecting attention has begun to show benefits for learning at all ages. A meta-analysis of 24 studies investigating mindfulness training with children in school settings found positive effects with moderate effect sizes on cognitive performance, particularly attention, stress reduction, and resilience. Educative and restorative approaches to behavior. A developmentally appropriate approach to behavior management recognizes students' behaviors as demonstrations of a developmental need and as a set of skills that need to be taught and developed, not demanded. Explicit teaching of self-regulation, conflict resolution, and other skills creates a virtuous circle of responsible behavior. Studies have found, for example, that even in elementary school, when students learn and practice skills of conflict resolution, they become more inclined to work out problems among themselves before the problems escalate. Students who have been aggressive benefit especially from learning specific skills for managing conflicts peacefully that differ from what they have previously learned at home or from peers. The results of such teaching are increased social support, improved relations, higher self-esteem, increases in personal control, and higher academic performance. Research also finds that coercive discipline, in which teachers manage student behavior largely through punishments, inhibits the student's development of responsibility. That makes sense? Ultimately increasing misbehavior, as students increasingly abandon their own self-responsibility for their learning and behavior and develop resistance and opposition to school, while exacerbating discriminatory treatment of students. A punitive environment undermines learning by heightening anxiety and stress, placing extra demands on working memory and cognitive resources, which drains energy available to address classroom tasks. By contrast, an educative approach supports learning, as teachers' proactive and positive responses create a safe and empowering classroom environment through reinforcing and reminding language, including verbal and nonverbal cues, approaching students in a non-threatening manner, presenting students with problem-solving options as a means of de-escalating potentially explosive situations, and using non-punitive restorative consequences. Students who learn in such supportive communities have higher levels of self-understanding, commitment, performance, and belongingness, and fewer discipline problems. These settings reduce the likelihood of disruptive behavior occurring in the first place. Authoritative approaches that strengthen interpersonal supports and connections, establish structures for fair processes, and encourage student voice are especially responsive to the developmental needs of adolescents and in line with a style that is known to be beneficial for parenting as well as teaching. And that's one of the things too. Through history, children have become responsible, especially when we were much more of an agrarian society. Children became responsible and self-reliant at a really young age. There are some children who historically have taken over their parents' business at age 10. And I mean, Alexander the Great was 16 when he was conquering the world. And I think a lot of times we forget that we're pretty much neurologically disposed to start taking on responsibility at around the time when we begin puberty. And so, although that's true, we still treat children at that age like they have absolutely no ability to take on responsibility. But what at least this paper seems to be indicating is treating adolescents after puberty more not entirely, but more like adults, giving them responsibility and the tools to solve problems for themselves is way more beneficial than punitive responses like this is talking about. And it would behoove us to treat them slightly more like adults, at least when it comes to problem solving for their own little mini societies that they build in school. Students who learn in such supportive communities have higher levels of self-understanding, commitment, performance, and belongingness, and fewer discipline problems. These settings reduce the likelihood of disruptive behavior occurring in the first place. Authoritative approaches that strengthen interpersonal supports and connections, establish structures for fair processes, and encourage student voice are especially responsive to the developmental needs of adolescents and in line with a style that is known to be beneficial for parenting as well as teaching. I already read that, but oh well. Educative approaches are also important for addressing the excessive reliance on exclusionary discipline in many schools, which persists in spite of evidence that punishment and exclusion do not work and often have harmful effects. This is like being sent to the principal's office or detention or whatever. This is particularly the case for many students of color, who are not only disproportionately removed from class and school, but also are removed for longer terms, with disproportionalities being the largest in subjective offenses that are more likely to be affected by implicit as well as explicit bias. Exclusionary discipline does not teach students new strategies they can use to interact and solve problems, nor does it enable teachers to understand how they may unintentionally trigger or escalate problem behavior. School discipline policies that exclude students through suspension and expulsion create a range of dysfunctional consequences. The more time students spend out of the classroom, the more their sense of connection to the school wanes, both socially and academically. This distance promotes disengaged behaviors such as truancy, chronic absenteeism, and antisocial behavior, which in turn exacerbates a widening achievement gap. The frequency of student suspensions is linked to academic declines and an increased likelihood of dropping out. Many schools have started to reduce their suspension and expulsion rates by adopting restorative practices that focus on reflection, communication, community building, rationale-based discipline, and making amends instead of relying on punishment. Restorative discipline is an approach to dealing with conflict built on relational trust, with systems including peace circles and peer or adult mediation, by which students reflect on any mistakes, repair damage to the community, restore relationships, and get counseling and other supports where needed. Restorative practices also include universal interventions, such as daily classroom meetings, discussions of how to manage feelings, and conflict resolution strategies. One of the problems here is there are so many teachers who just don't care. And man, like one of the political things is like we need to respect our teachers, but really there's nothing within the title of being a teacher that makes you a respectable person. And I remember one of my family members, when he was growing up, he didn't learn how to read at an early age, so he became much slower than a lot of the other kids. And instead of, like, he was, let's say, a year or two behind, and none of the teachers in his school actually wanted to help him. They preferred, because it was easier, just to say, well, just to suspend him or ignore him. And it would have been work to get him to sort of get up to date on the material, but none of them wanted to actually put in that work. And that's just one of the issues with teachers who are not very connected to their community, is that they don't care in a lot of instances. It's a paycheck to them, it's a job to them, and it's just something that good teachers are hard to come by. And a lot of these papers that talk about the good practices of schools and the ideal school, I don't know if they take into account just the fact that a lot of teachers are lazy. They don't want to do this sort of stuff. But maybe there are papers that deal with that side of things, or maybe there are studies or practices that help sort of force teachers into more of a tutor position like maybe the having kids that are with one teacher for, let's say, 3 years as opposed to just 1 year would help that. But I don't know. We don't really have that great of a school system in America. Syntheses of research suggests that restorative practices result in fewer and less racially disparate suspensions and expulsions, fewer disciplinary referrals, improved school climate, higher quality teacher-student relationships, and improved academic achievement across elementary and secondary classrooms. The more comprehensive and well-infused the approach, the stronger the outcomes. For example, a continuum model including proactive restorative exchanges, affirmative statements, informal conferences, large group circles, and restorative conferences substantially changed school culture and outcomes rapidly in one major district, as disparities in school discipline were reduced every year for each racial group, and gains were made in academic achievement across all subjects in nearly every grade level. Creating an environment in which students learn to be responsible and are given the opportunity for agency and contribution can transform social, emotional, and academic behavior and outcomes. Summary. Student learning and behavior benefit from explicit teaching of social emotional skills and opportunities to practice those skills throughout the day. As teachers infuse skills such as self-management, empathy, collaboration, and responsible decision-making into instruction, and explicitly cultivate executive functions that support social-emotional learning through classroom routines and habits, they strengthen students' abilities to focus and persevere in their learning. Teachers also play an important role in shaping students' beliefs about their own abilities, their sense of belonging, and their academic mindset. Self-efficacy is enhanced by a student's confidence that effort increases competence. A growth mindset enables students to engage more productively in academic pursuits and to persevere in the face of challenges. All of these are supported by an inclusive school environment that uses educative and restorative approaches to support behavior rather than relying on punitive methods that exclude and discourage students. It's about that time, so let's talk about the 3 things that I learned so far. The first one is what we were talking about. The literature seems to indicate that teaching or that teaching students as individuals as opposed to as a group and giving them their own merit sort of and teaching them how they can think of themselves as hard workers and how that hard work can lead them to academic and just general life success is really important and one of the most important things that a teacher can do for a student. Another thing is motivation. It's important to help students be motivated to do what it is. There are tools that help students to be motivated to have higher academic achievements. Some of these tools, not all of them, include helping students set their own goals and then sort of becoming a support system for their goal achievement. Sort of what I was talking about in one of the previous videos. But that's one of the strategies. Let's see, what's another strategy? Another strategy was to make it so that their goals are achievable. Make it so that they can so they can reach their goals, but also, what was it? Well, I don't remember, but maybe I'll go back and relearn it or reread it. But basically, inspiring motivation within the students so that they set their own goals and they have these what was it called? Executive function. That's the word. So that they improve their executive function so that they set their own goals and set their own competencies so that they can regulate their own behavior and their own emotions and regulate their own sort of social situations and problem solving skills is really important for students to achieve greater things in the academic world. And then finally is this last one. What was it? I'm going to cheat a little bit. Oh yeah. Restorative practices that help students to it doesn't give them really an out. It pushes students to solve their problems instead of separating them from the tribe, the little group in school. Those restorative practices for students who are, let's say, problem students are much more likely to bring students into a better learning environment than just pushing them out of the group or making them an outsider, sending them to detention, suspending them. All of those things harm students in their ultimate academic achievement. And what that does is it's more likely to lead to truancy and just generally dropping out, which has a bunch of other legal issues with it. So those are the 3 things that I learned. And I hope that you guys learned some stuff too. Let me know in the comments if there is anything that you learned that you want to share, or if you have any other issues or whatever. Let me know. Have a good day.